Hello everyone and welcome back. So what happened was I created my video for T58, tutorial 58, and I was very unhappy about it. So I'm doing a do-over with a bit of splitting content because I was trying to pack too much information into one video. And so I'm going to just split that between two videos and just do it all over again. So what I want to make clear for you guys is the workflow, the data flow of the request. So basically, when you ask yourself, okay, when someone makes a call to our API, which files are responsible for which step of the process, right? So, and I think it's important to know because at the beginning I didn't, and I felt like I wasn't sure which file should I change for which behavior. And so I'm going to try to make it clear for you guys. So what I mean by the request, basically, if you go to your console, because we were looking at this nice GUI that Django REST framework made for us for just the convenience, just because you know, you can just go here to this URL and play around with this URL without knowing how to do the curl commands and so on. But it kind of takes away this point, especially for newcomers, for someone who's new to APIs and programming, which is that it's not all nice and clean. What really happens is very raw data is being sent back to you. It's not like this. This is generated by Django REST framework and it's a HTML page at the end of the day. What really happens is we only get this via API. So I'm going to stick to this, to my terminal, and let me maybe just clear my screen because I was playing around with some stuff there. And I have a cheat sheet here, so I'm not going to type it. So let's maybe grab a list of countries via API. And this is how you, whoops. And I'm using curl, as you can see here, curl-x-get, which means use the get method on this URL. So basically, I'm just doing this, right? This is the equivalent of this, but this is more accurate in terms of how does it actually work? Because this is all we get. It's a JSONified representation of our data. And you might think right now we had more those countries. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 entries. It's much more. And yes, you're right. But I did make that limit just for showing you what you can do in the ModelViewSets. But let's just stick to the train of thought, which is, okay, how did I get this? What is the workflow? How does the request go from one file to another to then return this? Okay, so this is where it goes first, to the URLs. This is our router. It decides which part of pollutant viewset or country viewset is to use. Obviously, if we are in pollutant or country in here, because we need to hit, you know, API, air pollution, and then pollutant or country. To hit one of those two, but then once we have country, it then decides, depending on the method of the request and the actual full path of the URL, what to do next. Okay, so that's the first step. I'm not going to go too deep into URLs. It's pretty easy how to set it up. As long as you follow this, and oh, by the way, I made some changes here for this tutorial because I added country viewset. So instead of having pollutant here, which makes it kind of rigid, we could only then, if you include this router URLs, you're stuck with pollutant if it was here. But this way I'm saying, hey, I don't know what's going to be the next part of the URL. This is going to determine what goes in there. And you can see here, I called country and it is working. So this is the only change in URLs. So just make that change or just download the newest, clone the newest version of my repo. But what I want to talk about today is the APIs, so ModelViewSet. So that's the next step. As I said, the router decides which viewset is being used, and then it also decides which function method is supposed to be used. And I'm going to talk about these functions here. So again, a couple of changes happened to APIs. You might know by now that I like to write the code first, test it and make sure it works, and then just go through it instead of just typing. It's kind of like, it makes sense to me a bit more. I don't lose time on typing. So again, either copy from the repo from T58, or just make those changes as you can see in here. So Let me just scroll down. Okay, if you want to just stop and retype, but that's totally up to you. But basically what I'm showing you here is a couple of different methods that ModelViewSet is allowed to use. It has those methods built in. And by the way, how are they built in? Let me go to, so what I'm doing here, I'm clicking using command. So I hold command and I click on ModelViewSet, and that way it takes me all the way to my library in Python 3, site packages, REST framework, viewsets. I'm deep inside of my libraries. So if I open this folder here with my virtual environment and open the library, Python, blah, 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 and I go to REST framework, I can find my viewsets just here. Oh, here, viewsets. Right? So, but that would take quite a lot of time for me to figure out. And the beauty of PyCharm is that if you hold command and click, you get to the place where this code is basically imported from. So that's the source of whatever I'm using in APIs. And what is this? So this is kind of weird because it does exactly nothing and at the same time everything. It collects all the different mixins here, including generic viewset. That allows us to do the create, retrieve, update, destroy, and list. Except for collecting all the different mixins, really ModelViewSet doesn't do anything else. It just passes, doesn't do anything. So, but it's handy because I don't need to do this every single time. And Django REST framework is this flexible. If I didn't want to allow all of these functions to be available, I might as well just go here and instead of extending viewsets.modelViewSet, I could just go and be like, okay, I want to be able to retrieve and list, but that's it. I just want to have like read-only viewset. And all I have to import is obviously generic viewset and then these two. So handy to know. What all of these mixins have in them, it's actually pretty easy. So I'm gonna just have a quick look inside. So create. When we create an asset, it goes into this functionality. It uses this piece of code and it's not a lot. So if you want to know exactly step by step what's going on there, and it's actually something that we covered the last time in the last tutorial, you will find that we are using, so get serializer, you probably, you will find this method somewhere in the generic, what was that, generic viewset. And what it does, it just returns a serializer. And just like in the last tutorial, we just pass data inside, and that's how you create, you go to view is valid, and you check if the data that we passed is valid, and then we perform, which is basically serialize.save. And we did that in the last tutorial. So it's pretty easy. And then we just send back the response. And that response has the data of the new object as a body. Okay, so then we have the retrieve part, mixin, and all it does is this. So basically what it does is we get the object based on the request. So inside of this getObject method, it knows how to retrieve the PK from the request, and using that PK, primary key, we can get an actual instance from the model. So it's going to be Django object, and then we serialize it using an instance, right? So again, last tutorial, we created a serializer using something called instance. If I put instance here, and by the way, it's telling me, hey, this is not a project file. I'm tinkering with the library, so I shouldn't be doing this. But basically, you probably remember if I did instance equals and put that actual model instance here, it's equivalent to doing just serializer parentheses instance, and then we just respond with the data, right? That was the data of serializable data of this instance. Next one, UpdateModelMixin. So again, by the way, this partial here comes from this function. So if we use patch method, the router knows that we are supposed to go, here, partial update, and all it does, it changes the quarks to partial to be true, and then we check it here. So as you can see, update is being called in partial update. So basically this is for put and this is for patch. But when we do patch, we just say, hey, it's going to be partial. And then we go here, oops, and we check that partial here. Okay, if it's true, then it's going to be true. If it's false, if we didn't go through this, it's going to be false. Then we get the instance from the model, and we try to create a serializer with the data from the request. And we have the instance here, and partial is either true or false, depending if it went through this function. So basically, if we use patch, and then we check the validation and save. Okay, so that was the update. Then we have the destroy. This one doesn't even use serializer. We just take the instance and delete that instance. Easy peasy. And then we have list. So again, we covered that in the last tutorial. We just use many equals true. The rest is pretty simple. So now what I prepared for you here is just overriding those functions that we just looked at from those mixins. They are all collected here. That's why we have an access to all of them here. And I can do super. Super is only if we inherited this function from some of the, it could be, as you know, this is not written inside of ModelViewSet because ModelViewSet has no code in it, but it's somewhere down inside of stuff that this class is inheriting from. So it could be a chain of inheritance. But basically, once that link is created, then I can override those. So we were looking at create, we were looking at retrieve, we were looking at list, we were looking at update, partial update, and destroy. And that's this CRUD functionality that we were talking about when we were talking about REST API and DRF. So CRUD, create, retrieve, update, and destroy. Okay, so let's start with create. So when do we use create? And this is a silly example of how you can overwrite create. I just didn't want to super the return because basically it would be completely useless. You don't overwrite with just like returning whatever is supposed to happen anyway, because why would you overwrite in the first place? I just wanted to give you a silly example of how would you use this place inside of a model view set. Why would you want to overwrite create? But let's try to access create. What do you think? What method am I supposed to use? Get, post, put, patch, delete. And if you know APIs, you know it's post. If you don't, then it's fine. You're just learning, it's going to be post. So let me go to my cheat sheet and I'm going to here create curl x post h header. So I need to specify what's going to be the format of the data I'm sending. It's going to be JSON. Then I'm specifying where to send that data to. What is the endpoint? Okay. And that's going to be just the country / and nothing else, no PK. And then I'm going to send that data. So -d is specifying that I'm sending that data. So I'm going to just copy this, paste it here, and press enter. And it took me here, right? So my breakpoint caught my action, caught the call. So it proves that this is the call that you have to do to get to this place, right? So, and why would you want to overwrite anything in create in the view set? Why not in serializer, not in the model? Which, by the way, best practice says the closer to the model, the better. If you do any operation around the model, you want to be as close to the model as possible. So if there's something you want to catch, let's say someone sends, let's just have a look at the model here. So instead of making this constraint somewhere in the view set where I'm checking like, okay, when someone goes and does the create, I want to check if there is something that is called blah, 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 whatever we sent in the request, which in this case is test CC. And then, okay, if it exists, then respond error, blah, blah, blah. No, that would be a problem because then what if we want to have two different entries? We want to have an API, but then we want to have just like a website. The closer to the source, the better. So this is better way of making this constraint, right? But then sometimes it makes sense to go a little bit higher in the hierarchy. And for example, if you want to tap into request in serializer and in models, you don't have an access to the request. So it's a good idea to do it in here, to make the changes here. So what can I get from the request? For example, I can check, let me open here, request. And for example, we have something like user here. And it's an anonymous user, meaning I'm not authenticated. And if you look at is authenticated, it's false. So it's a good way to check if the user is authenticated. And by the way, using REST, which is stateless, you probably always send some sort of a authentication token. So you don't really change the server that, okay, in this session, I'm going to be authenticated. It's more about like, hey, authenticate me, give me a token back. And from now on, whoever is authenticating keeps that token on their side and be like, whenever I need authentication, I'm going to send some sort of a super secret token. Obviously, this is not the logic for handling tokens, but just given an example here. So, and as you can see, in here, there was just ISO code and name. I wasn't authenticating. There was no authentication token. So that's one example of using create. What about retrieve? When do we get to retrieve? What does retrieve stand for? So let's go here and go to retrieve, which is list one. It shouldn't be list one, it should be get one or retrieve one. And that's exactly what I want to do now. I can't remember if I have CC. Let me see. Not authorized. Oh, sorry. Copy, paste. And indeed, we were caught in retrieve. So that's where it's happening. So what can we do in here? Let's say we still want to tap into this authenticated functionality. So let's say if the user is not authenticated, what if we want to just retract some of the data? We don't want to give him longitude, latitude, and altitude because let's say you build an application that somebody has to pay for, but you can show them, give them a demo that, okay, this is how it works, this is how you download the information, but I'm not going to give you actual information because, they're going to just use the free stuff. You might want to do something like this in here. Okay, so when I go, you'll see that detail was not found because we don't have CC, so let's do PL. I'll just go, and as you can see here, we have Poland, blah, 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 and there is no longitude, latitude, and altitude. So it worked. And we know that using get is taking us to the retrieve, which also sort of retrieve is list, but it retrieves multiple. So let's try multiple. And all you have to do really is just get rid of the ID. And boom, we have multiple assets. And as you can see here, what I did, again, some silly example, I'm getting the result of all of the items to list out. So let's see in the result, step up, step down really, result, data, and in data you can see that we have loads, we have 41 items, but what I'm saying is no, somebody is not authenticated here, so give them just 5 items and send it back. So that's how you get to the list part of the model view set. Then we have the update here. So let's say what we can do for the, okay, so what I decided is no, there's no updating or destroying of countries. Once you create one, then there's no messing around with them. Silly example, but it could be the case. So, and you want to have a nice, error saying it's not allowed, proper HTTPS status. So the user knows what to do. So let's try to put something, which is update. We got to update, and what it does is error updates are not allowed via API. And that's what I was talking about. Like, okay, let's say we want to allow changes to this model, to country, but I don't want to block anyone on this side. I want to disallow that from the API side. So not just like from the inside of Django, but from ModelViewSet, where someone is trying to change something via API. It's like, no, you're not going to change anything. If someone wants to change it, it's supposed to be done from the inside of Django, kind of like closer to Django anyway, maybe admin page or whatever. Partial update, so you might know what to do. Instead of put, what do we use? We use patch. So let's use patch, enter, and boom, we are in partial update, which by the way, then takes us to update, as I showed you before. So you go again, it's gonna tell us updates are not allowed via API. Oh, cool. And the last one is destroy, which also will not allow us to destroy. So let's go and look for, because I had it there, okay. Let's go to cheat sheet, and it's gonna be just delete, and the ID, which we don't have CC, let's change it to PL. It's gonna catch me here. Yeah, I am trying to destroy, but instead of just doing what it's supposed to do, which was just like delete the item, the instance, it's gonna just return, sorry, you're not allowed to do it. Updates, it's just supposed to be deletion. deletions are not allowed. Okay, so I hope it kind of gives you the feel of where would you use those methods. You know these methods exist, so if you ever need to override them, go ahead and you're free to go. You have an access to request. And in the next video, basically I'm trying to show this workflow. So we were talking about URLs going to the router, then the router goes to the ModelViewSet, and the ModelViewSet is using the serializer, right? So this is kind of the hierarchy of files. Routers are talking to the viewsets, viewsets are talking to serializers, and serializers are talking to models. So next time I want to talk about serializers and what we can do with their methods and what's inside of that model serializer. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.